Hi, everybody. Welcome. And we're going to go ahead and get started. And I see many of you already introducing yourselves and saying hello in the chat. Please continue to do that. It's lovely to see how many people are here. So good morning, good evening, good afternoon. I think we have people from all over. My name is Chantel Warner. I'm one of the two co-directors of CERCLL, and I'm here today with Kate Mackay, our associate director, for today's webinar, Language Learners Become Filmmakers. Before we start with the main event, I have just a couple of announcements to share with you all. Well, one is first, I want to tell you just a little bit about CERCLL, if this is the first event you've attended. So CERCLL is the Center for Educational Resources in Culture, Language, and Literacy. We're one of 16 national language resource centers funded through the Department of Education, and we're located at the University of Arizona and the College of Humanities. So if you don't already know about this grant program or about the other language resource centers, please do go check us out at our joint website, which you see there, and also check out CERCLL's resources. We offer a variety of different professional development opportunities like this webinar, as well as materials and resources for teachers. We have a couple of upcoming events that I want to highlight. One is in January, our virtual event, which is the Intercultural Competence Conference on the topic Decentering Mobility and Intercultural Education, Engagement, Equity, and Access. We have a really exciting set of plenary speakers, Uju Anya, Maria Dasley, and Jennifer Pipitone, to talk about different angles of this topic, and the registration will be coming up real soon. So there's also a scholarship application deadline, which is coming up next week, and that is for people who are K-12 educators or graduate students. So if you fit that description, please do apply, and that comes with a registration waiver. And then we're already thinking ahead to next semester for the spring webinar series. So we have 3 speakers next term: Emma Trentman talking about translanguaging, Tracy Kwan, who'll be talking about ideologies in L2 teaching, and our colleague here, Chris Knisely, who will be talking about the Gender Just Language Education Project and trans-affirming pedagogies in the language classroom. So if you've been following our webinars, or if you enjoyed today's event, which I know you will, then please also look for these future webinars. So with that, I'm going to turn to today's event, Language Learners Become Filmmakers. We have a panel of collaborators who will be presenting on their ongoing work on this project today. They've done a whole lot of work, and they have long resumes that I could read to you, but then we wouldn't have enough time for the webinar. So I'm just going to introduce them very briefly, and then I'm going to let them talk some about their work across the webinar. So in alphabetical order, Jill Castek is an associate professor in the Department of Teaching, Learning, and Sociocultural Studies here at the University of Arizona. We have Lia Falco, who's an associate professor in the Disability and Psychoeducational Studies Department. Jessica Summers, who's a professor in the Department of Teaching, Learning, and Sociocultural Studies, and Veronica Oguilve, who's a doctoral candidate here in the SLAT, the Second Language Acquisition and Teaching Program. And they all have their own individual interests, but you'll see a lot of connected interests that'll come out, I think, in this project as well, and things that are related to learner motivations and how those relate to different aspects of social and professional selves, as well as interests in literacy and language development, and in particular, digital literacies. So I'm going to turn the floor over to them now so that they can talk about their project and lead us through this webinar, and join me in welcoming our wonderful panel of speakers.
Hello, everyone. Before we get started with our presentation proper, I wanted to offer you a new learning opportunity that is closely related to the one that you're participating in today. The Center for Latin American Studies, the Center for Middle Eastern Studies, and the Digital Innovation and Learning Lab have partnered together to create a learning opportunity for K-12 and community college educators called Worlds of Experience. And we are looking for teacher participants who will work collaboratively to design and implement an international immersive virtual field experience with their students, and share the process with participating educators and schools. Our recruitment is ongoing here specifically for language teachers, and we want to offer you an opportunity to get involved for our second cohort. It's 4 sessions that will take place in the spring semester, and we look forward to sharing this experience with you. Thank you for thinking about this as an option for continuing education. And with that, Veronica has put in the chat the Google Doc that allows you to connect to how to apply. And I'm going to turn it on over to Lia.
Great. Thank you so much. Before we get started, I just want to share many thanks to the folks at CERCLL for supporting this project. It was really an amazing opportunity for us, the four of us, who have shared and overlapping interests, but bring to the work, I think, some diverse perspectives. And it enabled us to really think creatively and explore new and exciting ways to collaborate on a project that ties together filmmaking, language learning, and STEM content and instruction in ways that also support student interest and engagement that we think are both contemporary and quite flexible. So we're really excited to share with you how those different pieces tied together in our own minds and our thinking, and also in the project that we're going to talk about as a way to illustrate what we were doing and where we think this might head. So in an effort to be as clear as possible about our project and how we think it can connect to you and your work, we have our presentation organized in sections where we will talk about how the different pieces, filmmaking, instructional approaches, language learning, student experiences, and assessment all fit together. And along the way, you'll have opportunities to brainstorm ways to fold this into your own curriculum and instruction.
Thanks, Lia. So just to give you a little bit of background about what it is that we did and how we hope to support your own teaching and learning. Our main goal was to bring together film and language as a means to present visual representation of students' learning and understanding of Spanish. This was offered in a 5th grade Spanish class using contextually meaningful content. And in this case, our content happened to be science oriented. It was about how important it is to be a water steward in the desert Southwest, because that's where we live. We live in Tucson, Arizona, as do our students. So exploring this goal with 5th grade students, it was challenging, but also knowing that elementary students were successful, very successful in creating, directing, editing, producing, and sharing their stories made us confident that really any language learner could do similar work. And you're going to get to see examples of the students' work throughout our presentation. They really did an amazing job. So as you all know, being a successful teacher does require flexibility, creativity, and adaptability with your own meaningful content. And so I'd like to just take a minute and ask you all, if you are a language teacher, to share what kinds of content you teach or could teach that helps contextualize language for your students. So in the chat, if you are a language teacher, go ahead and tell us what kinds of content you like to teach your own students. So articles, short stories, history. Okay, university level could be some of the same things, current events, authentic experiences, festivals, environmental issues. That's very close to what we did to our kinds of content. Yep. Digital media. These are all great examples. So as we go through our presentation, we would love for you to think about what content is meaningful for your students and how video can help them represent visual representation of what it is that they're learning in the language that you teach.
We were thinking about a resource portal for your use that could be really essential for taking what you've learned today and really transforming it for your own use. And so along with the recording of this webinar, you are going to receive a link to this website, and we just wanted to provide a short overview. The website provides the link to these slides that you will see today, so you don't have to furiously do your note taking separately. It will include a recording of the webinar so that you can think back and think forward about some of the themes and ideas that got teased out today. It will include the interactive activities on the Padlets that we are going to ask you to interact around today. We're also including all of the curriculum resources and instructional pieces that were built as a way to give you a jumping off point for how you can adapt and use and flexibly apply some of what you're learning today. We put together a showcase of the student films that got created through this language learning activity across the series of time that we worked with the students, and then additional resources that are provided for you in the form of readings, in the form of mentor texts that you may implement or use as you move forward. I wanted to begin our time together today to think about how filmmaking and language learning might provide a nice pairing for both supporting digital literacies and 21st century skills and language learning at the same time. So why pair language learning with filmmaking? In our context, which was elementary grade Spanish learners in a very beginning language learning context, we really recognized straight away, along with the teachers we were partnering with, that filmmaking is a very visual form of media arts. And when students are beginning learning language, that visual form allows them a jumping off point to label things, to connect their language to tangible artifacts or resources that are all around them. And so we felt with our learners in particular, giving them this genre of film and encouraging them to use film to tell stories creates a context for meaning making that both supports an understanding of the content, text and content, and the opportunity to utilize language for purposeful reasons. So in short, language learning, language use, and communicating is nested in a series of meaningful experiences that students can draw from as they learn language, as they connect with one another. So in thinking again about why pairing language learning with filmmaking can be impactful, we distilled 4 main points. One is that in filmmaking, genres can be multiple. And in our implementation of filmmaking, our students made films that ranged from the poetic to the scientific and everything in between. And the ability to use different genres according to the language that they were learning and the beginning level they were working in seemed to be really supportive of both understanding, connection, digital literacies, and language learning. We recognize that reading, writing, listening, speaking, communication, and visual learning in a filmmaking sense are all integrated. And as we worked with the teacher and her students to be able to build these films, we saw deep levels of those integrated literacy and language learning skills come together. Filmmaking taps into an iterative process of creation, rehearsal, revision, and reflection, and that really helps students to deepen their own learning. So they wanted to be the ones who made their films better. They wanted to revisit and revise. Instead of that being driven by the teacher, it was really student-centered in the ways that they wanted to make their films better. And then finally, the filmmaking encourages authentic and flexible language use to communicate a message to an audience for a purpose. We all enjoy watching films, and this making films experiences allowed for that translational experience from authentic meaning making into something that was tangible that could be shared. So we use the idea of language learning to advance understanding in this particular project. As Jessica shared earlier, the students were investigating water in their community, water at their school, in order to become a water steward, someone who would think about water as a precious resource and all the ways that it impacts our lives. So as we were and students were investigating water as a topic, their language learning around the use of vocabulary, around the constructs of language development was embedded in a context that spoke to their immediate community. They were speaking to their fellow students, the surrounding community, the teachers that they worked with, and their advocacy around water became contextualized, meaningful, personally relevant, and important to them. And as you think forward about the topics that might be a good pairing in your curriculum with filmmaking, we suggest thinking about those that are meaningful and personally relevant to the students as a real draw for what their language learning can be embedded within. So we wanted to share a couple of ideas about how language is both situated, alive, ecological, and used in purposeful ways when it comes to filmmaking. In our context, we and the teachers and the students were really thinking of filmmaking as connection, collaboration, and community. And through the processes that they put forward of inquiry, of creating to learn, of using their creativity, using their self-expression, they became important drivers of exchanging information and ideas with one another, for being sounding boards to help improve their practice, to help improve their understanding, to help improve their language development. So you're going to hear a little bit more specifics about the instructional methods and about the processes that we used. But we feel as a takeaway message, thinking about language as situated, alive, and used in purposeful ways was a strong driver of the experiences that we had in these contexts. We utilized a project-based learning methodology around filmmaking. And there are 8 or 10 things in this circle diagram, but we really want to draw out 4 important ideas when it comes to thinking about project-based learning. The first is the purpose really drives the process. So we provided and the teacher provided significant content for students to want to learn about. That was water. They had a strong need to know that they wanted to become a water steward, and they had driving questions about the things that they wanted to learn. Their language learning was contextualized by their driving questions. They had voice and choice in how they wanted to organize their thinking, how they wanted to express their ideas. And all the while we were accepting their approximations of how their language learning was unfolding, understanding that across this process, their language would develop over time. They were pairing 21st century skills, digital literacies, and multimodality together to pair their imagery with what they wanted to say, to think about the underlying music and how that might contribute to their mood of their compositions. And with the public presentation that ended this content unit, the students showcased their films in front of their whole school so that they had that ability to address an authentic audience. They were advocating for water stewardship. They were sharing what they had learned about water, and it became important, a driver for them. And that prompted reflection and revision. So this nested process of project-based learning is something that's transferable to other content and other contexts as well. And we found it as a nice way to organize our own thinking and the process for students. So all the while, as students worked across this project-based approach, they were engaged in multiple opportunities for language rehearsal, collaboration, and oral practice of their language. The filmmaking and learning began with topic knowledge and vocabulary. Students learned about how to be a filmmaker. Their communication was contextualized, as were their digital literacies. And at the end of the process, the meanings were situated and contextualized to what it is they wanted to communicate, what kinds of ways they wanted to advocate for water and its importance. So with that, I wanted to take, and in each of our segments, we're going to share one of the student films, so you could see how this process comes alive for our students. This one is Soy Agua, and you'll see that it is a poetic representation of the ways that students made sense of their water content and ideas. This is a short film. It's about 2 minutes long, and we are excited to share it with you. We hope you appreciate what the students came up with.
Soy una roca, simple y desolada.
Soy un río, vasto y profundo.
Soy una corriente pequeña y débil.
Somos agua.
So we hear you clapping for these students' amazing efforts in creating a beautiful film that really evokes a sense of water and what it means in their community to them from their own perspectives, using Spanish as that delivery system. What we'd like to do today, we've introduced you to ways that filmmaking can link to language learning. And while we were working in water, we want you to think about what content areas could be a supportive match between filmmaking and language learning, and how might pairing support from a beginning, intermediate, and advanced language learning level support and be connected to language learning. So I believe that Veronica has put the link in the chat to this Padlet, and let's take a few moments, maybe 4 or 5 minutes to respond to these questions, and then we can synthesize some of our takeaways after that.
Okay, we're going to move on with the next area, which is instructional approaches to teaching languages using filmmaking. So the curriculum is very important. It includes, in this case, we included what a filmmaker is. We use mentor text, which are like examples of multimodal compositions to show students films. And we concentrated on message of the film. I'm gonna explain a little bit more about those in the next slide. So first, this is a sample lesson we used. We try to make students or help students develop their identity as filmmakers. First, we explore what a filmmaker is, what a cineasta is, and what kind of things the cineasta does, right? Like, for example, being creative using different modes, thinking about the audience, thinking about different perspectives to convey messages. We talked about the different, like the way we see the same thing could be different. The personal take that we take on things. Then we discuss what was the connection between the cineasta and I. Now that students talked about like the different resources, the different characteristics, features, and tasks that the cineasta does, they were able to understand that they could be cineastas too, filmmakers too. They saw the connection. And we also talked about like filmmaking is not just about entertainment. It's a way to convey messages, important messages that should be heard. So it is about creativity, about conveying messages. And we also gave them an opportunity to analyze some of the mentor texts we created for this level. We created very specific mentor text. As teachers, we also develop like different digital literacies that we use in our classrooms. In the text, we concentrated on the messages and the strategies the filmmakers use to convey these messages. So I'm gonna show you now a mentor text. This is again about water. So you can watch it now.
¿Por qué no hay agua en mi casa? ¡Oh no! Dejaste el agua corriendo en el baño. ¡Oh no! Dejaste el agua corriendo en la cocina. ¡Oh no! Dejaste el agua corriendo en la ducha. El agua no se debe desperdiciar.
I created that video. It took me like 10 minutes to create a video like that. So it is not that time consuming, of course. So what these mentor texts do is they provide an example of a multimodal digital product. It is not a follow along guide, but it is intended to spark creativity in the students. And it is the basis for conversations and discussions about the different strategies used. And we unpack the relationship between language and all the visuals and all the audio that it is included in the video. So that would be the role of mentor texts. Now we're going to talk about the message. We focused on students having conversations. We elicit their answers. We had conversations with them. It wasn't like we were teaching them something. We were developing a topic with them. So in this short discussion, you will see in this video how we talk about the mentor text that we just showed you a minute ago.
I noticed that you spoke it in Spanish, but you put English words up there so that people can see.
So when you create a video like this, you can use Spanish and you can use English at the same time, or you can actually combine like some parts in Spanish, some parts in English. It depends on your intention and the words that you want to use.
I also noticed that like, because you wanted to make it sort of like sad or dramatic, you did it more in black and white and you had some sad music playing.
So I use those techniques to create this mood of sadness. Was it effective? Did you feel? Okay, so as you can see, it's a back and forth conversation about the different strategies used. So in this case, what students do is to think about message first. What is the message I want to say? And what are the resources that I'm going to use in order to support this message? So they created the films based on La Tierra unit, and they used all the language necessary to convey their messages and all the media necessary. Something else that is important about this project in the next slide is that it's a very unique project because there was collaboration and fluid in implementation. As I mentioned before, in the Spanish class, we had La Tierra unit, the earth. They also had contact with the science teacher. They were studying some water topics. So there was this interdisciplinary connection that was taking place. And also there was support from media teachers and film teachers, and we incorporated outdoor experiences. So as you can see, the learning, the development of the project didn't happen just in the classroom. They were walking around their campus and looking at different things. So next slide, we are gonna see one example of students were collaborated with 10th graders. So we had some 10th graders come visit the students, work at different times, creating storyboards, creating scripts, and working with them in the different processes. And we allow the students to explore the campus, explore the community, which are pretty important things to do when you want to have students learn a language in context, in an ecological manner. So I'm going to show you here some of the places they went to. They went to the garden, to the farm in the school. They visited the wetlands in Santa Cruz River Heritage Project. So there they took pictures, collected information, talked about the different messages they wanted to say in their films. All of these resources, they use them in the production process, and together with teachers and other students, they went through this. Something interesting also is that students were able, in the next slide, students were able to see the projection of one film created by professional filmmakers, Beyond the Mirage, about water in the Southwest area. So they changed from being the viewers of a film to producing the films and screening them in front of the community, which is really important, in front of the school community. So they had that opportunity. So it changed absolutely the motivation they had to create films too. And now we're going to watch a different film, so you get another look at one student production.
El agua es un recurso precioso para los humanos. Por eso nos gustaría compartir sobre el agua en el campus de TGS. La regulación de agua de lluvia en TGS está junto al jardín y el corral. La regulación de lluvia es como el tanque de captación de lluvia está en el extremo oeste de la escuela. Su enda se usa para regar plantas.
Tucson city water is used for the bathrooms, drinking water, and many more. It is used all over the campus.
Reclaimed water is our last resource that we're going to mention today. We use it for the sprinklers on the grass fields on the TGS campus.
The TGS campus has many water resources that allows us to take care of our plants, animals, and people.
In our conception of languages, we see languages not as discrete units, but a system that comes together to give you all the resources that you need to communicate a message. So students decided what to use at different moments. So they would use Spanish or English. We didn't have any restriction. And as you can see in some of the films, they just wrote subtitles in English sometimes, or they said the film just in Spanish. Sometimes there was a combination of half of the film in Spanish and half of the film in English. It's very important in these processes to allow students to express themselves freely, because it's a process of meaning making, and they're gonna use all the language resources to convey this meaning that is intended. And it's a step-by-step process. There's the development of, that's how languages are developed. Work in the Padlet again, where the most valuable resource that all teachers have is each other. Without collaboration or growth, our growth is limited to our own perspectives. So I know that we come from very different conditions and different circumstances and fields, and we have different types of students. So what we're going to do is to think about our own contexts and learner populations, and think about what are some of the adaptations that we could make in order to use filmmaking as a strategy for second language acquisition. So I'm gonna share the Padlet with you so you can write down your ideas there. Okay, we're going to move on to thinking about language supports in language development and use, which was something that was mentioned before. So what we did in this filming process, we engaged the students in a process of meaning making and creation that was iterative. So it wasn't linear. I have this graph that you might think that is a step-by-step process, but students came back to different stages at different times. We think, well, translanguaging was encouraged using all the linguistic resources they had available, English, Spanish, Portuguese, any resource in order to create their products and participate in the process too of the creation. We created a storyboard. We use different strategies like translation and allow students to do collaborative compiling to make their films. So I'm gonna talk a little bit more about that in the next section. So let's start with the storyboards. Storyboards are a really good strategy in order to help the students unpack the topic, think about themes and sub-themes they can add to their stories, organize their thinking, because it helps them save time. When you have students create a film with no direction, it might take a little bit more time for them to organize themselves. So the story map has that other function of organizing their thinking. And they can sequence events, they can change the order. Also, it allows for linking visual design and language together. So as you can see in that example, you have drawings, you can have pictures, you have language. Some students wrote the script in Spanish right away. Some of them made a combination of Spanish and English. So these story maps allow you to plan these scenes and even like kind of think about what kind of media you need in order to support the message that you want to say in the language. So it is not just about pictures. Oh, I want to like add these beautiful pictures, but there's a meaningful connection between the visual design and language. Then we have the the language development. So we allow students to bring their own background knowledge in either language. We're gonna watch a little bit of this negotiation in a minute. Some students use online translators. I know teachers, sometimes we're scared of translators, but I wanna tell you one anecdote that was pretty interesting. One student created this complex text about science. They use Google Translate in order to translate it to Spanish and use it in the movie. But there were moments of realization that the level of competence the student had versus the translation they found or they created in Google Translate didn't match. So they understood that they needed a little conversation simplification of the language so they could say themselves and understand the message themselves. So that was something interesting about their translation. Also, they talked to teachers, to peers, so there was this connection with other people around the campus. And as I mentioned before, not only from their grade level, but different grade levels. And we had an integrated communication system because we allowed a lot of multiple modes come together, visual, auditory, and others, and other semiotic resources in order to give students these much needed elements to create a movie that was meaningful. And also they could use Spanish or English or any other language they wanted to use. So now we're going to look at short video. It's a conversation between me and a student about something he wants to say in English that he couldn't find a way to say it.
Water to use in the Santa Cruz River.
Okay.
That's what this is.
So you want to describe the action of like the water falling into the river?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. What do you want to say in English?
Like,
So
well, probably like the part where it's going down into the dirt and going to the Santa Cruz River.
Okay. So el agua.
After this part, the student starts writing what I'm saying. So it is kind of like a dictation kind of method, but he is like, no, maybe I don't want to say that. I want to say something different. So there's this understanding of what I'm saying in Spanish. He's writing it, but he changes his mind and he tries to say something else that fits into the movie he wants to make. Then in the next slide, we're talking about language use while they were collaboratively compiling. So this was very interesting because this process is driven by the learners. We don't have a teacher who is always there in a position of power telling students what to do, but they take a responsibility in empowerment, in starting a process of negotiating meaning and adding language. There's expertise exchange. What one student doesn't know, the other one knows. In the media production, like they discuss what images go together with the language they want to say, they want to use. And there's a lot of rehearsal and feedback. So this is one of the videos that shows one example of this rehearsal.
Es que el agua ayuda al corazón.
Agua el corazón la hacer la sangre correr.
It was ayuda.
So you see a lot of collaboration between the students. If you were there, they talked about that part like 14 times. So it allows time for saying the words again, asking how to pronounce them correctly, and if the grammar is correct, for example. But we didn't want to have like perfection. We want them to have communication. We have to keep that in mind. And that's what was achieved through this project. We're gonna look at another film. It's called Water in the Human Body. So next.
¿Por qué necesitas agua?
Agua es muy importante para la vida humana.
¿Qué hace el agua dentro de mí? Agua viaja por el cuerpo por los órganos.
¿Cómo usa el estómago el agua?
El agua ayuda a digerir la comida en el estómago. ¿El estómago usa agua? Wow.
¿Cómo ayuda el agua a los intestinos?
Ayuda a la comida a viajar a través de ellos. ¿Habla qué? ¿Cómo es que el agua ayuda al corazón?
Ayuda al corazón a hacer la sangre correr.
¿Cómo puede el agua ayudar a los pulmones? Ayuda a limpiar la mucosa que se hace en los pulmones.
So as you can see in this film, students tend not to read the scripts. So as I mentioned before, they're not actually scripts, they're storyboards. So students think about what they say and they practice over and over, and then they record their videos. Now we're going to participate in another Padlet. This one is related to our roles. There's the role of the teacher, the role of technology, and the role of students. So the big question is, in this type of project, how do you see the roles changing? And how are all these three elements working together? So I'm going to share with you the Padlet. Okay, now we're going to talk about, we're gonna examine students' films and perspectives now. So you can see the other side of the coin.
We found that it was just as important to have conversations with the students before, during, and after their filmmaking experiences to find out ways that they benefited, the ways that they learned. They had wonderful suggestions for us. And it was really, I think, helpful for the teachers to find out what the students thought of this experience. The students really felt like this was a great way to tell their stories. They felt like it was a very personal way. It was a very personal way to connect with other students in the class. It helped them think about how language is used outside of the textbook and the classroom. And we literally got them out of the classroom to do some of this work. They loved being outside. They felt like they had the freedom to make different choices in the types of ways they communicated, like the poetic film and like the scientific film. And they got to practice their language with each other, both through film and with each other as they talked about their filmmaking process in the classroom. So in the next slide, we have some quotes from students who said things like, I learned a lot about water, which I didn't already know about. And I also learned a bunch of new Spanish words that really helped me with this and my film. Another one is, I used to think filmmaking was just a take one, action, cut. There is a bunch of other stuff that you need to do, putting together the movie, finding the right scene, like cutting off and putting in the noise and off noise, using different music. It is very easy to memorize Spanish words by kind of matching them up with the video. You can say, oh, look, that's a river. Oh, it's that. And you could, see what everything is. And you'd be like, oh, that's a rio. So our students had some really wonderful insights and they got it. And we were just so pleased that they were able to learn Spanish, make meaning, think about the ways that they could be water stewards and responsible water users in their community, and make these beautiful films. And so some of the things I think that were important takeaways from those quotes is that the students learned together, they made meaning facilitated by multiple modes. They used filmmaking and communication to develop their own sense of digital literacy and literacy in Spanish, and that language emerged from the need to communicate. So it really was an amazing experience for us and for the students. Now we're going to introduce, and we've gotten a lot of questions already from you, so I hope we answer these questions in the next set of assessment guidelines. If you have additional assessment questions, please post them in the Q&A, and I will try to address those while Lia is talking more about the assessment process.
So we know that we're not the first ever to use filmmaking in classrooms, but this was a first for us, and we were trying to be very intentional about the way that we were using film, or having the teachers and the students use film, by integrating it with both science content and language learning. So there's these different elements of our work that we were really trying to be intentional about for a specific reason, because we felt like it would be very engaging for the students, that it would be an opportunity for them to do all of the things that many of you have already mentioned, be co-creators, that it would afford them opportunities to communicate with each other and use language in ways that perhaps they might not otherwise in a more traditional language classroom. So we had some clear ideas about what this was about, but we weren't sure that it would work. And so we thought a lot about the best way or ways to assess student learning when using filmmaking. And so the questions that we asked ourselves, and Jessica, maybe the next slide would be good, were how would we know that they were learning what we intended? And we being kind of the collective we. This was really a collaboration between us as university partners, the teachers who are bringing this to life in the classroom, and the students, and what outcomes might be the most impactful in this kind of work. So for us, using a framework, an assessment framework that considers knowledge, skills, and dispositions, sort of the attitudes that students have about their own learning, was a really helpful way for us to think about how and when we might best capture the different learning goals along the way. So you can think of, we thought about the what and the how and the when. In this slide, you can kind of see the different ways that we were thinking about formative and summative assessment. So the kinds of feedback that students were giving us along the way, and each other and the teachers, and then in the end, the product that they produced and their reflections on their own experiences were all really important in pieces of information for guiding our thinking about how this might look in other classrooms.
Okay, so this is an example of another film called What's in the Water. And this is one of my favorite films because they use lots of different kinds of visual presentation methods to think about water in the Southwest.
La tierra es un lugar único, 60% de ella es agua. Usamos el agua de muchas maneras, antes, fregores y electricidad.
¿Pero qué hay en el agua?
El agua necesita dos átomos para existir, hidrógeno y oxígeno, que se unen para formar agua. Agua representa dos hidrógenos y uno oxígeno. El hidrógeno tiene uno protón, el oxígeno tiene 6 protones, pero sin núcleo puede contener 8. El hidrógeno se une al oxígeno. El oxígeno ahora tiene 8. El agua se transforma en muchas formas.
La forma sólida es el fluido. Cuando el agua se enfría, se vuelve el helio.
La forma gaseosa es vapor. Cuando el agua se calienta, se vuelve vapor. El mensaje de nuestra historia es que el agua es única. Muchas gracias.
So now we're going to walk you through a Padlet activity that that asks you to think about assessment in terms of some prompts that take you through those different project stages. And Veronica has put the link into chat. Thank you, Veronica. So the questions in Padlet are: what kinds of content knowledge can your students demonstrate with film? What kinds of language skills will your students develop by creating films in your class? How will students think differently about what they are learning in your class by creating films? And while you're working on that, I'm going to answer orally some of the questions in the Q&A so that it's part of the recording. Joseph had asked, what is the class level, novice or intermediate? We said anyone can apply the concept of filmmaking in their language class. The students we worked with were novice language learners in this case, but we believe any level of language learner can benefit from filmmaking. Fernando also asked, how is the feedback students receive? I mean, the hard work, and can they feel sad if the instructor is too hard in the grading, but at the same time they have things to work on? That's a really good point. And so we suggest that you give progressive feedback throughout the filmmaking process, like those project stages, so that the students can be, really proud of the films that they produce in the end, using critical and formative feedback throughout the project. Denise also asked about assessment strategies, which we hope your questions have been answered, but if not, please go ahead and type another question. Denise also asked for some references and articles in which these projects were analyzed and discussed. And we are going to look for those kinds of things and put them on the website. We're also working on our own article, so that will be forthcoming, and we'll include that on the website as well. Joseph asked if we teamed up with other subject teachers as well as audiovisual teacher. We absolutely did. The science teachers, the tech specialist, who was also a math teacher, and the language teacher were all part of the team. And the school that we worked with was an excellent, I think, sort of space for us to do this kind of project because the teachers all worked so well together. So how much time did they spend in making the film is Syed's question. Veronica, do you want to answer that one? I'm not sure I can say put a time amount on it.
Yeah, I think it was around 3 weeks. Yeah, 3 weeks, but it depends, right, on how you organize things, right? So it is. I cannot tell you like an exact number.
Yeah, it's a tough question to answer, but
I jump in on that one too.
Oh, absolutely.
These were not self-contained classes where elementary students were with the same teacher all day. So it wasn't 3 weeks all day. They had approximately a 50-minute period, which was their Spanish class. And luckily, the teachers wanted to combine their efforts together, and they sometimes use their science time and their Spanish time together to be able to support the development of these films. But they did the storyboarding in the science class, they did the filmmaking in the Spanish class, and it was a standard, 40 to 50-minute period across 3 weeks where they built these films.
Thanks, Jill. While I'm summarizing the work of the Padlet, can you take a minute to answer Fernando's question about how he's looking for a guide on how to make these kinds of assignments, like learning languages through film for dummies? Is that something that we need to do maybe for our website? What do you think, panelists?
I think it really is dependent on a number of different things. So in our example, this was an elementary age, group of students, though we think this could be applicable in middle school, high school, and even in college classrooms. So I think that's one thing to consider. And then also language development in the target language whether they're novice language learners or intermediate or advanced learners. And then also the type of content that you might be integrating this with. So those are, I think, probably 3 fundamental elements that you'd want to consider in doing this. And then the type of film also, somebody mentioned earlier in the chat that these, or at least one of the examples that we showed, seemed to be like a documentary style film. And there, we also showed examples that were really artistic and poetic, and others were much more informational and scientific. So those are all things that the instructor might consider when designing curriculum to use filmmaking in the classroom. And I think we could provide a general guide, sort of timing and thinking about when and how you might include the storyboarding to help students organize their thinking. But the teacher's really responsible for making a lot of curriculum decision making based on those elements that I just described. And then maybe my other panelists would want to jump in with their thoughts.
While we continue thinking about that, I'm just going to provide a little synthesis of what's been written in the Padlet so far. There's some really great points about what kinds of content knowledge. I especially like the ones that say they want their students to be able to choose the content that they're learning. And I think that that's absolutely doable as long as you provide, guided instruction for the language and the filmmaking part. How can students make meaning of the content in your curriculum? I like that you want to connect it to the community as we did. I thought that was a very powerful motivator for students. The conscious engagement with the message that they're trying to communicate. Let's see, their speaking skills, absolutely. And it encourages students to ask essential questions. That's really powerful. And then how will students think differently about what they're learning in your films? I think it is less abstract when they get to produce something that is shared with their peers and with their other teachers. And that's what our students got to do in their little film festival. It creates critical thinking as they really have to think about the topic in order to convey meaning. Team working, that was huge. And I love that last film as an example because they really worked great together as a team with all aspects of that film. And that's probably another reason why it's one of my favorites. I'm gonna, go ahead, Veronica.
I think that teamwork that you just mentioned is related to one question that we have here by Michelle about technical support. We created an environment in which there was a lot of collaboration. So there was expertise coming from student to student, teacher to student, even student to teacher. So if there was any like technical difficulty, it would be solved collaboratively with the knowledge of the different people in the class, and all the people involved. So that was one of the very, very nice things that came out of this project.
I agree.
I wanted to offer one bit of advice, just jumping in on what Lia shared. And a lot of you might have the same question, where do I begin? I want to start this process of pairing language learning with filmmaking. How do I begin? And part of that is starting small. We didn't have the time or opportunity to share this in this webinar format, but we started small. We had students make very brief, very short, very tiny films just to get the sense of what a film involves and what a process involves. And I think we did that short introductory project, 40-minute periods. So instead of diving just directly right into a big 3-week project, that involves storyboarding, and then involves bringing in filmmakers and, you know, the media education teacher, and being really tight on the message. We gave them this exploratory opportunity to learn a short filmmaking series and started small, and then we built from there. So we made mistakes along the way in this really short frame, this introductory way, so that we could help them to scaffold each other and scaffold us on how to grow it into something bigger and broader.
And at that time, I remember we even used PowerPoint as a resource to create short films. Just, I think we have to be creative and seek for collaboration with other teachers in order to implement things like this. So we learn from each other and support each other.
Joseph asks, how tiny did they begin? Like 2 to 5 minutes? I would say even smaller than that.
Much smaller. Yeah.
And using
20 seconds.
Yeah, 20 seconds, using things like PowerPoint. Very, very simple.
Brenda asked or noticed that many clips were used where students used iPads. Any format will do. You know, kids can use the smartphone or any device that can capture video.
There was a comment from Hytham in the Q&A. This was an interesting presentation and great effort. We use something similar in the Arabic program at UC Berkeley. We use filmmaking with performative teaching, project-based and task-based approaches. So it's great to know that you're also doing something similar, Hytham, and maybe we can provide more information about your project on our website.
Thanks.
How did students find their groups? That's a great question. Did we assign them groups? Did the teacher assign them groups?
I think that was really fluid. I think that some students started out choosing their own groups, but moved to a different group. And it was less of the group dynamic than it was what and how they wanted to share what they had to say. So some of them took a scientific approach, some of them took a poetic approach. So there was some fluidity across the groups as students wanted to move toward making that message that they were thinking of. At least that's how I remember it. Veronica?
Yeah, sorry, that's how it happened. They had choice even in saying who they were going to work with.
So we're running out of time here, and Kate has put in a poll that gives some webinar feedback. So we're interested in having you participate in the poll. And then Veronica wanted to take a moment to summarize our takeaways from what we've shared so far. Veronica?
Yeah, some of the takeaways, just a few, about language development and use is that they use language to understand the world around them and to communicate ideas. So that's the main objective of using language, not just learning language to memorize lists or learning language for an exam, but just to communicate and understand the world in a different perspective. They have voice and choice. There's a flexibility in topics and different language forms. So we are not restricting the student. They use varied forms because they want to convey very specific messages that are linked to the topics they choose. So the language is emerging, right? It is emerging and it's always changing. And it's embedded in an ecological perspective, it's embedded in the context. And also there's multimodal meaning making. They reinforce the use of language by curating modes and using them together with languages and different filming techniques for these two.
So there was a question in the Q&A about the Worlds of Experience series. Is it catered for African participants, since we're sharing this information again?
Thank you. This is a pilot project that we hope to expand. And right now, it's a little bit challenging to accept international participants in this particular experience. That said, we would love to have your contact information to be able to keep you informed about additional and other participatory experiences to get involved in this work. We're trying to keep our cohort small because we're learning along the way, and we're hoping to expand this experience moving forward. But Veronica, do you want to just explain what this experience is again, so we can help others to get connected with it if they so choose?
Yeah, the main objective is internalizing the curriculum, having teachers create together with the students immersive virtual experiences using ThinkLink, so they can experience the world it could be in a 360 way, in order to use language meaningfully and include culture and other aspects that are closely related to language. So it is an immersive experience that educators create with other students, and then later on share with other teachers. That's the idea of having a multiplying effect later on.
Hytham wants to know if the experiences are only for K through 12 and not university level instructors.
We are accepting university level instructors and community college language educators as well.
Here you have our emails in case you want to ask more questions or if you want to contact us directly. So feel free to contact us.
Well, I just want to thank you all on behalf of myself and my CERCLL colleagues and everyone else here. I saw lots of praise and comments coming in the chat, so we'll make sure that the presenters also get that. I know I always feel really inspired seeing the student examples, and I can see from all of the discussions in Padlet that many of you also shared this excitement and saw the relevance for your different classrooms. So since you can't unmute yourself, participants, I will clap on behalf of all of us for our presenters. Thank you for this wonderful webinar, and thank you all for spending the last hour and a half with us.